B, can you rename Doug?
Yes, I can.
Thanks. You having troubles with your video, Doug?
I guess I can't. I don't know what the deal is.
All right. Oh, it changed, but we can't see you yet.
Okay.
It kind of. It switched though. It just black.
Don't know why.
Do you normally sign in on your phone or a laptop or?
Laptop.
Hmm.
Um. Well. Oh. So, is there a place? Oh, wait. Aha.
Yeah, we see you.
Yay! Sweet.
Well, then,
Perfect.
sorry. I feel like I'm in a garage, which is actually where I am, but
Well, before we go live, I was just gonna kind of give an introduction and welcome people and share a little bit about our People's AFN, and hand it, well, I can do my intro, you can do yours. And then do you want, is it gonna be like you wanna ask people to engage in dialogue? Should I let them know like it's conversation style, or are you more like presenting?
I think conversation style, if we can.
Okay.
I'll start out with some words, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
And
can
then-
have you do blessing kind of.
Well, I'll start out with, actually, you can do blessing. I'll just start out with introduction, and then I'll start telling stories. And in those stories, we can decide what when people have questions or they want to interact. How about
Okay.
that?
Sounds good.
Did I let folks in and get it started?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's coming in now.
Nasty. Welcome, everyone. We're just letting people in. Thank you for joining us on your lunch hour today. I just want to share that this is being recorded and it's on live stream of Facebook. So if you don't want your video on or you want anonymity, you can change your profile name and turn your video off just so you have fair knowledge that it's on. But thank you so much for being here. And we're going to ask folks to stay on mute for now. But I'll walk through what we're up to here. Welcome, Ruth Ann. Yeah, feel free to put in the chat your name and where you're joining from. Oh, hey, Eva. I can't see all the videos, so sorry if I don't give you a shout out, but I can kind of see people popping in. But welcome, welcome. All right. Hey, Helena. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. All right, well, good afternoon by 5 minutes. I can get us started so that we get as much time as we can with Doug, our special guest. So welcome everyone. Paglavici, Uvanga Charlene Apa, Ganupak Siska Akpik, Chinik Mugarunga, Sili Natirvik Mugarunga, Savaktunga Native Movement Me, Gender Justice and Healing Director. My name is Charlene Upbuck and my Newpak name is Akpik. My family is from Gullivan in White Mountain, Alaska, but I reside here on Dena'ina lands here in Anchorage. And I work at Native Movement as the Gender Justice and Healing Director, and it's an honor to be here this week. I'll pass it off to Doug to give an introduction in just a moment, but this week we have events to celebrate. Normally when we come together at the Native New Year of AFN, of course, we would normally be running into each other at Dena'ina Center or there in Fairbanks and be able to do all these conversations. And we had to, of course, adapt, as we are wonderful at doing over the last 2 years of doing these things virtually. So thank you again so much for joining us for our events. We had a really awesome panel yesterday on land back. Today we have Doug here to do lunch with an elder and to share some stories. And then we have 2 more lunch events the next 2 days. So on Wednesday and Thursday as well. So be sure to check those out. But it's really important that when we come together for AFN that we are doing things with the knowledge and the leadership of listening to our elders, and that we take their direction and receive and make space for all that learning. And so I'm really thankful that Doug reached out and wanted to share about Native thought. And I'll pass it to Doug to do an introduction of himself. And Doug will be sharing, and then we'll have it dialogue based too. So if there's questions and conversation that happens, I'll look out for little virtual hands and also be keeping an eye on the chat. But Doug, go ahead, I'll pass it to you and you can share a little bit about yourself.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I grew up in Ketchikan. I come from the Tsimshian tribe. And sometimes I get a little bit confused because our language is called Shemalia, but our tribe has a different name. Turns out there are 7 different tribes in our tribal area, and we didn't actually come from Alaska. We came from the area between Alaska and Canada. So some of my people come from Canada, some from United States, Alaska. And my family is the Fawcett family as well as the Eaton family from Metlakatla. That doesn't mean a thing because mostly what people ask me is what my clan is. And they don't really care about my tribal name so much as my clan name. So my clan is Eagle Clan. So did you want me to just go into a presentation now at this point, Charlene?
Yeah, sounds good. And Doug is being really modest. Doug is an advisor to Native Movement. We've been really thankful to have him be an advisor here. He has a long history of working in substance misuse across the state, suicide prevention and counseling, and also oftentimes he brings his lovely wife, Amy. I've had the pleasure of working with Doug in public health spaces. He also advised my dissertation, so he's research savvy. So Doug is just an amazing elder that we're really thankful to work with. He's brought a canoe project to our organizations, and here in Anchorage we partner on. And so I just want to uplift Doug and thank you for being here. And we're just excited to share and listen from what you have to share. So yeah, go ahead and dive right in.
Okay, you are very, very kind. Thank you so much. So I grew up in Ketchikan, Alaska. And besides being Alaska Native, just to give you a little bit of background about who I am, our family was hungry most of the time, or much of the time anyway. Our uncle would bring us food, you know, and they'd share whenever they can, but most of the time we were on limited rations. My younger sister and brother did not cope well without food, so I would steal food. I learned early how to survive. I did the best I could, but carried a lot of pain and anger because of poverty and racism in my childhood through my adolescence. I did not adjust well to the modern world. I spent a great deal of my younger years in foster homes, juvenile detention facilities, and iron houses. It turns out that our tribal nations suffered generations of poverty, oppression, and racism. Our time of suffering became known as historical trauma, and active efforts were made to kill the Indian, save the man. But saving us meant we were to give up our historical hunting and fishing grounds, our tribal ways of living in our community, and live as assimilated, civilized natives. We faced an onslaught of efforts to separate us from our land through policies intended to place us in the margins of society. We were compelled to live on reservations or tribal villages, separated from our traditional hunting, fishing, and gathering grounds, and survive on government commodities rather than food we gathered ourselves for the most part. Some tribes who found a measure of success living in the modern world were terminated by government policy and had their land and resources exploited by extraction organizations for timber, mineral resources, fishing and hunting, or land speculation, just to name a few. But the real price we paid for our lives was the diminishment and loss of our ability to live in balance with creation and to live as we needed to do to take care of ourselves and our community. Many fell victim to alcoholism, homelessness, suicide, and a host of other social ails. By the late 60s and early 70s, so much damage had been done to my body and soul that I spent days living on the streets, drinking, and happily fighting my way along whatever happened to be my day. I had many conversations with Native elders during those years. And they all said that if one were to attain balance, one needed to chart their own course in life. They also talked about what had happened to us as a people and that it would be understandable if we didn't do so well. But it didn't have to be that way. It just so happened that during that time, President Nixon, he made a statement on that I happened to hear. And basically what he said was, the time has come to break decisively with the past and to create the conditions for a new era in which Indian future is determined by Indian acts and Indian decisions. those times and conversations helped to heal my future, because it was just seen to be a pretty good idea that we were to become responsible for what happened to us or didn't. But also the days of during that time, it was known as the 60s, and then the early 70s. It was also a time of what could be called civil unrest. It was a time of the American Indian movement, the women's movement, the Black movement, the Chicano movement, the civil rights movement, the protests against the war in Vietnam, a time when the nation was at war with itself, much like today. And so in my conversations with elders, this is, I kind of gleaned from those conversations that in order to change the future, you need to picture a different future. And I really wasn't, very, very sophisticated in being able to talk about what I was thinking or what I was learning, but it just seemed so interesting that a regular Native person could actually heal the future or change their future. Because it seemed to me that I was going to live as an alcoholic and live on the streets and be one of those homeless people. Or I don't think they called them homeless back in the day. But we were in fact street people, and there were a lot of very young people living on the streets back in those days anyway, so we kind of fit right in. But what I gleaned from all that, from what the elders were saying, was that that we needed to have a picture in our mind of what could be. That if we were to be able to change, if our future was to change, we need to picture in our mind's eye what could be. And I remember I had a conversation with an elder from Hopi land, from the Hopi people. And he said that if our future, that if we are to create a better future for ourselves, we need to listen to some of the teachings of our ancestors. And they had prophesied what would occur. And so we're on a path that would take us, the human family, to their own destruction. But more to the point, that we were on this path as Native people, but we could change it if we wanted to, but we had to make different decisions. And he said that the time for making those decisions would be when the eagle landed on the moon. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And basically what he was saying was that the eagle landing on the moon story was that that we had lived a destructive life as a human family, and that there were the red, yellow, black, and white people, and that we were at war with each other, and that because we were at war with each other, that we were leading ourselves to our own destruction, and that that would continue. As the way that he talked about it was until the eagle landed on the moon. Well, at the time, I couldn't picture any possibility of an eagle landing on the moon. But it turned out in 1969 that the spaceship Eagle had in fact landed on the moon. And it was reported that the eagle has landed. And it was during that time that Thomas Binyaka, as part of their Hopi tradition, went and talked to people and said, now is the time to change the future. Now is the time to heal the future. And for myself, I was just a regular street alcoholic, but I knew that I was in for some big trouble. I knew that I wasn't doing so well, and I probably wouldn't do so well in the future, and that if I were to change, that the change would have to be it would have to occur now, not tomorrow, and not bemoan what happened to me in the past, but what was going on right now. But I couldn't figure out what to do because I couldn't really, I just couldn't see the possibility of doing anything for myself. One of the difficulties that I had, for example, was that I wasn't able to read. I didn't know how to read. And that if I were to be successful, one of the tools that I'd have to develop was learn how to read. It turned out that I began to just copy verbatim books that I was reading, just to get used to the idea of forming words and then saying the words out loud, and then beginning to say them as quickly as I could, mostly because I got impatient. But it turns out that it helped to anchor what words meant and what they were about, so that I was in fact able to teach myself how to read. And so I learned to read. And the whole notion that I could in fact do something was good, but it also turned out that I didn't have the discipline to sit through school. So I never did get through high school. I wasn't able to get a degree of any kind. I just flat couldn't learn anything in a school setting. But the other thing that the elders told me is that I couldn't be focused on myself. That if I were to create a better world for myself, I had to do it within the context of community. And they talked about one of the principles of development, and that is that community development and personal development go hand in hand. So that as I became, as I developed, as I worked to help the community, by doing so, I would help myself. Didn't make a lot of sense, but basically that's what they told me. Community and personal development go hand in hand. And that the next part of that was that it had to come from within. In other words, it wasn't something that could be put upon us. It wasn't something that came from the outside. It had to be something that we developed ourselves, that nobody could quote unquote help us. We had to ultimately help ourselves. And so even now, I'll develop a thought or develop a process and move forward with it. And then I'll engage the support of people. And then the people would decide if it would bring resources that would help. But personally, I never really got into that. I always figured that our development comes from within ourselves. But the only way that I could continue this particular process was to engage in a process of learning. And so I began to read everything that I could possibly read. And I started out with books related to, cowboys and Indians. I began to read books that were relatively simple to read, but then I got into some real books that talked about how people thought in different parts of the world, as well as particular native thought. And there weren't a lot of them during that time, but there were some. But the process is called what I called a great learning enterprise, or I engaged in a great learning enterprise. And it was during that time that if I were to help to heal the future and engage in this process of community and personal development, that I needed to do so with the help of our ancestors, our elders. And that even at that time, we didn't have a lot of elders around. The at the time I lived in Portland, Oregon, and I lived in Ketchikan, and most of the elders, the ones that we considered to be elders or the wisdom keepers, they didn't talk much to young people. That and when they did, it was they mostly told stories that sometimes I didn't understand what the implication of the stories were. It took me a while to begin to learn. But they said that embedded in the conversations that they had or the stories that they told me, that that we needed to follow the teachings of our ancestors. And at the time, it didn't make a lot of sense. They also said that there needed to be that we needed to develop an interrelationship with nature and with each other. But probably the more operating word is relationship. That we needed to do to be successful in relationships, and that the relationship was what was important. And so sometimes, even though we would squabble about the way to do things and who was right about this or who was right about that, what became important was to preserve the relationship, even if we so that we ended up listening to each other and talking with each other and preserving the relationship we had with each other, even though sometimes we would squabble and try to get our own way. Turns out that it's more important to preserve the relationship than it is to have our own way, which I found really interesting at the time, because I was more willing to just fight with people and be right about things rather than develop preserve the relationship that I had with the people around me. But it turned out to be a real powerful lesson. The other thing that the elders told us is that we need to think like a native, and that, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, but basically holistic development is about mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional development. In other words, we have to pay attention to all those elements at the same time that we're developing ourselves and our ability to live successfully in the modern world. The other part that I found kind of interesting was that we needed to develop what they called indomitable will. We needed to develop the willpower to do what we needed to do in order to take care of ourselves, even though sometimes we had difficulty in understanding what exactly that meant. So those are the way that I described them ultimately became known as what I call 49 days of ceremony. But one element is our I call Father Sky. One element I call Mother Earth. And then mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, which is holistic development. And then the other element is volition, which makes up for 7 different elements. And at first, I really didn't understand the full implication of this. But it happened that I was traveling on Nelson Island here in Alaska, and I was there to talk to the elders because the health corporation wanted me to work with their young people. But I felt like I couldn't work with the young people unless I talked to the elders and told them what I was doing and what my intentions were. And so I showed up out there, and it was relatively early, way before the meeting started, but it was a beautiful day, so I decided to climb the hills behind the village and just have a look at nature. And when I was up on the hill there, on actually the very top, I could see these little animals running around there, and I really didn't want to get too close to them because I was worried that I would startle them, and I didn't want to disturb them in what they were doing. Turned out that even though I was trying to be real careful, they heard me anyway, even though I was like a quarter of a mile away from them. And when they moved around and came back together, they turned out to be muskox, and that the little ones were in the middle, and the older ones, with their horns, were on the outside. And so that ultimately became a vision of what a community was and what the challenge was in order to help our communities in the modern world. So the inner circle, the first circle, was the babies. And the second circle was children. The third and the fourth circle were our adolescent boys, adolescent girls. The fifth circle was our moms and our dads and our aunts and our uncles. The sixth circle was our elders. And basically the elders and the moms and dads, they would watch and they would protect and guide the younger ones in the inner circles. And when I talked to the elders said, that because I had been trained by my elders, I should talk to them. Well, it turned out that when I talked to my elders later on, what they said was that those weren't 6 circles, they actually were 7 circles. And and I said, well, like you described them as the babies to the elders, what do you mean 7 circles? And what they said was the 7th circle represents the challenges or the predators, if you will, that prey upon our community, prey upon our children, and that in order to address those things, we need, first of all, to accept that they are part of our world. And the second thing is that they have become predators because we lost respect for them and we became afraid of them. And so I asked them, well, what do you mean when you're talking about predators? I wasn't really sure, because in the natural world, when you talk about predators to the muskox, as they turned out to be, that you're talking about the weather, you're talking about accidents, you're talking about the hunters that come that come to catch them and kill them. So those are the predators. Says, well, what about, how does that relate to people? He said, well, the predators are the ones that come into our communities and they prey upon our people. And they talked about the alcohol and the drugs. They talked about the suicides. They talked about disease. They talked about ignorance. They talked about the modern world and the desires of the modern world, in which I talked about earlier, the extraction workers that want our land, want our resources, and they try to take them away. And that in order to strengthen ourselves, in order to address those, what is happening in our communities, we need to pay attention to those kinds of things. We need to not be afraid of them, even though they are by nature predators in that regard. They are also part of our world, and that we need to respect all that is in our world. And so that particular story, I call it Seven Circles story, formed the basis for beginning to address the challenges that we have in the modern world in making our world safe for our young people, in order to train people for that extent. So, how's it going so far?
Well, I'm always frantically trying to take notes when I'm listening to you, and I imagine that's what others are doing. We've been putting some quotes in the chat. And I guess we can ask folks if they had questions or comments so far. But I know I'm always just trying to frantically make sure I'm capturing and learning.
Okay. Any questions that, I know this comes out, I know I'm trying to say things really fast, but in order to cover a lot of ground, but at the same time, I don't want to get too far away so that people don't. But anyway, what do people think so far? Anybody?
Yeah, some things in the chat that I can field to you. Someone asked, yes, this is being recorded. And so then you can re-listen. Someone wanted to focus more again. Someone had a comment, there's so many amazing lessons here today. We put some of the quotes here. And then Jan was wondering if you can repeat the 7 circles. They missed one.
Okay. So the inner circle, the middle one is the babies, infants. And then the second circle are the toddlers or children. They're just, they're not babies, you don't have to pack them around. They can pretty much, they're just now starting to walk and talk on their own. And that's the second circle. The third and the fourth circle are the adolescent boys, adolescent girls, teenagers, if you will. They're not children, but they're not adults yet either. And that, so for some, it lasts until they're about 27 or 28 or so in the modern world. And then the fifth circle is the moms and the dads, the aunts and the uncles. And they're the ones that do sort of the day-to-day work of raising children and helping them to develop. And then the sixth circle is the elders. And the elders make up, they're the kind of the keepers of our knowledge, our traditional knowledge. They help us to remember our culture. They help us to remember how to live successfully in the modern world. And they teach us specific things. And I'll, at some point, I'll go back and go over some of those particular lessons that have to do with native thought. And then the seventh circle, of course, is the predators. And that's things like alcohol and drugs, suicide, domestic violence, and a host of other issues that prey upon our community. And the difficulty is we don't prepare ourselves to address the predators. We kind of accept that they're in our lives, but we actually don't do anything to prepare our people for them. And that's part of what the gap is. The gap between the old world and the new world. And what that has to do with is what happened when we were made to be dependent upon the modern world, so to speak. When they started taking our, they exploited our resources, and they made the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service responsible for us, and they took away our land and our resources and didn't allow us to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves. And we're still in that state, actually. Long answer.
Doug, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Why do you consider the third and fourth to be adolescent boys and girls? Why are they two separate circles?
The way that the elders explain that to me is that I think of them together because they first need to be a human being. But that and then as they develop into their roles tend to be separated out, meaning that that there are some roles that are good for men, there are some roles that are good for women, there are some roles that are both. And that, but there definitely is a difference between a man and a woman. People choose those though, ultimately. You don't grow up to be, I mean, if you grow up to be a man, for example, then, and you forget how to be a human being, then you could be a man in the sense of a soldier that's taught to fight all the time. And a lot of them never grow past, a lot of men don't grow past that. Well, it turns out women don't grow past that either.
Okay, thank you.
What are aspects of being a real human being then?
Well, mostly is around being kind to each other and respectful to one another. It has to do with the values that we operate out of. And each tribe or each part of our community starts out, but it has to do with how we treat each other. And we treat each other as a human being. In other words, treat each other with respect and kindness and honor and respect. And interestingly enough, many of our people don't learn that. They're so busy trying to be a man or trying to be a woman that they forget that they need first to be a human being. Sometimes I tell people, well, that's what my elders tell me. And it makes sense because, I spent a lot of my growing up years fighting with everybody. And, and for what I felt was the fighting for the right thing. But it turns out that doing the right thing for the right reasons in the right way has its foundations in first being a human being. And sometimes, and it turns out that people are different. People, everybody is different. And that you can't accommodate the differences between people unless you're willing to listen to them and hear them out and find out, well, sometimes people are this way or that way. And that, and with that comes total acceptance. This particular one can be a long, long conversation.
Yeah. Let's see, the question in the chat is, from where you stand in the Northwest, what gifts do you see the South and East bringing to the human family or the broader community of all life? So kind of a directional question.
So, it's kind of interesting that you'd ask that question because in part of the prophecy is that the answer to the world's problems is going to come from the North, right? But when you look at it within the thinking of the native thought, that mental, physical, spiritual, emotional are part of the directions. And the north direction is your mind, is mental. It has, and they talk about it as wisdom, snow on the mountains kind of wisdom. That so that when people get to be elders, they come from the north. And so and that is just one of the gifts, right? The west is physicality, east is spirituality, south is emotion. But they engender a holistic person, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. At the center is the person, volition. And some people like to say, well, there's I think it has to do with the characteristics of the person, not the people per se, even though people make up characteristics. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Anishi.
And there's a few more. There's someone asked, so predators are not fully human beings. Or how do we understand predators then?
They're the ones that, like it's a symbol, the term is symbolic, right? Predators. And so symbolic means that they could be alcohol, they could be drugs, but then they're not, alcohol and drugs are not always predators, right? It depends on how you interact with them. Like alcohol can be pretty good for you. Clean drugs can be pretty good for you. Certain kinds of drugs, right? They help to heal, plants and all those things. On the other hand, and this is where it can get really, really, really confusing. But, when you look at what has happened to people and what they have done in the world, just because they just because they exist in the world and they have caused harm doesn't mean that they're that you can judge them for their relative value. What you need to do is just recognize that they're there. It gets really, really complicated and confusing sometimes. I'll give an example of leadership. Sometimes, like I mentioned, President Nixon, he was president of the United States, and he told everybody that he wasn't a crook, but he turned out to be pretty crooked. But as far as Native people concerned, he was responsible for the passage of the Indian Self-Determination Educational Assistance Act. He was also part of what created the Alaska Claim Settlement Act. So even though he did some illegal things, he did some things that were pretty tremendous. Another example is the return of the Blue Lake to the Pueblos back during that time, and he did it not because it was a good thing to do for the Pueblos, but because he thought he would piss off the Republicans. Who knows? So it all has to do with being in balance.
There's two somewhat related questions here. I'm going to fold them together, Helena and Jan. So someone asked, what advice would you give to the next generation to carry our traditions and livelihoods? They say we're losing and lost a lot. And I feel that that will still continue. The next generation to lead is Circle 5. And the related question is that, is there a program that you know of that addresses the predator circle, especially for youth in the children or toddler circle? So these two questions are thinking about the future generations and guiding them and protecting them, it sounds like.
We, the process that was developed, this is me and my wife use, is called 49 Days of Ceremony. And basically what we have done is learned from our elders what, how to live successfully in the modern world. And then we teach, but we don't know everything. And so we're always learning, and we're always open to learning. And that, and so that to the extent that we can, we engage in conversations with people that are on this path, and hope to share this knowledge. And actually, we need to engage in a process of generativity. In other words, when you get to be my age, and I'm not really that old, but when you get to be my age, you need to begin to share with your young people, not for the purpose of telling them what to do, but simply to share a point of view about the world. Ultimately, they have their own choice of what to do, but if we don't talk about it, we don't share with it, we're not going to learn. And sometimes we have to share just because it's the right thing to do. Coffee and food work when you're talking to elders, or tea.
Doug's been very generous with sharing and teaching. There's one question: what is your definition of success? And then someone wanted to know where they can learn more about prophecies.
So there are some people that talk about prophecies, like, for example, Anupak Galitkasate, which is part of the Northwest, the Nana region area. Menelik, he talked about prophecies. And there are several books written from that region about prophecies. There are also some that are written from the lower 48 Indians. And but the thing is that you need to sort of walk the spiritual path on practical feet. The prophecies are stories, they're and you learn them because they're interesting to learn. You can even Google them and find prophecies. And the idea is just to expand your knowledge. But the other part is to look at what you're learning, that even your children or your babies can tell you prophecies, can express prophecies, prophetic thought. But they're stories. They are stories that are told. And collect them.
And how would
Did I answer the whole question?
I'm putting information too in the chat for folks about some of the programs that have supported the 49 Days of Ceremony, and that curriculum in writing form is still being put down, but it lives very much in the work that Doug does. Someone asked also, what is your definition of success?
Well, like I think I look at success sort of like when my children are happy, when they're able to live successfully in the modern world. In other words, are able to do what they need to do to take care of themselves. they produce a certain kinds of result. Like, for example, my son is very confident. He knows he has the characteristics that he's able to take care of himself, and he's able to live in the world, even though sometimes the world is kind of conflicting. And I'll give you an example of that. He works over at the hospital as a security guard. I think I don't remember if that's exactly the term, but he works security over there. And he was kind of unhappy being over there because he had to kick people out, even though they come over to the hospital because they need help. And it made him unhappy. So, being the dad that I am, I said, well, okay. So I started to talk to some of my friends and look for a new job for him. And then I found one. And then I said, man, this would be perfect for him. He has the skills, he has the ability to work with people, it pays more and all that stuff. And then he decided, though, that he wasn't willing to leave his job because he would be leaving his buddies in a lurch. In other words, he would be abandoning ship when they needed him. His friends needed him because everybody was quitting over there. At least that's the way I understood it. And I thought to myself, wow, he's loyal, he's dedicated, and he's doing what he needs. He's doing the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. And so I think about that as success. And I wish to say that it was my fault, but it's really not my fault because he's definitely his own person. But I see him being successful.
Doing the right thing for the right reasons in the right way. I'm missing
Yeah.
something. What was the other one?
No, that's it. Do
Okay.
the right thing for the right reasons in the right way. That's a moral. He's a moral human being.
Charlie is. Someone's asking about other folks who have, if you've done training for the 49 days with Algonquin tribes, and Kathleen's helping out here too. I know that you've worked with the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. But did you want to share any other folks you've worked with for the 49 days of ceremony?
Well, I have worked with them and I learned from them, meaning that I've been around the United States. I've been to every state, including Hawaii, and I've been in Canada. But my training came from the elders and all those tribes. And some of them, I ended up with a group of healers one time, and we did ceremony for several days. And they talked about their different tribes, where they're from, what they did, from Cherokee to the Florida tribes to the Maine tribes, Great Lakes tribes, Southwest Indian tribes. Never really, and then some of them that I'd never heard of before. Sometimes there's only just one left. Everybody, every human being has value that I've so far so good, right? But not only that, but non-native people as well. I mean, I would like to say, man, we're really special and we're better than everybody. But in fact, there are some people that are pretty nifty, even though they're not Native American.
Well, thank you so much for coming up to the end of the hour. I I know, just I really appreciate all of the time and teachings and your willingness to share. And I feel like we've been dropped a lot of knowledge that we can reflect on for a long, long time. I think that that's the beauty of the way that we story tell, is that these will continue to teach us way down the road, and we'll continue to learn from them for a long time. And I've always appreciated that a lot. And I'm really grateful that you were here. I was actually thinking, I met Doug at an AFN. I was just volunteer tabling, and Doug walked up to me and asked, "What does defend the sacred mean to you?" And that was literally how I met Doug. And so it feels like a perfect time to be doing this event together during the AFN time in which we met. So just thank you so much. And there's some folks saying thank you in the chat. So appreciate all your time and teachings and being willing to share with us today. And so this is recorded if you all need to revisit some of the knowledge drop. I know I will need to. It's recorded, and so we can revisit it and continue to learn. But thank you so much, and hope you all have a good rest of your week. And maybe we'll see you at the other events we have the next 2 days as well.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm very glad to do this. Besides that, I'm not done yet, so.
Not cutting you off, that would be a bad thing for me to do, is to cut off elders.
It's all good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for,
Lots of thank yous in the chat. Yeah.
all right then. Well, you take care in the meantime. We'll catch up again sometime.
Yep. We'll see you soon.